In this short discussion, we're going to review the required reading that looked at the social media responses to the Kaepernick and Rapinoe national anthem protests. So let's just review these instances. On August 26, 2016, Colin Kaepernick, the quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers, sat on the bench during the national anthem. Later, he switched to kneeling. On September 4th, 2016, Megan Rapinoe, a player for the Seattle Reign soccer team, mirrored that protest. Now, in both cases, these athletes' nationalism was called into question. They were labeled anti-American, anti-military, and anti-nationalist. The point of this article was to determine if the public was simply latching on to the narrative presented by the media, or if it was the narrative that was presented in social media context, or if it was simply based on the narrative of these two athletes. So let's start this discussion by watching two short videos that replay these incidents.
Out of that protest by Colin Kaepernick, 49ers quarterback knelt instead of standing during the national anthem at last night's game. He was not alone. ABC's Kana Whitworth was there and joins us now from San Diego. Good morning, Kana.
Yeah, George, good morning. One of Colin Kaepernick's teammates joined him in taking a knee, and a Seattle Seahawks player also didn't stand for their national anthem. But this morning, Kaepernick says he's willing to make real change and plans on donating $1 million to charities that he's been working with to help end racial inequality. Overnight, San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick refusing to stand during the national anthem again. This time, he took a knee right behind hundreds of service members being honored on Military Appreciation Night. As the crowd and players stand, you can see Kaepernick kneeling on the sideline. Teammate Eric Reed joining him.
And he's receiving heavy boos here.
The crowd booing every time he took a snap.
He's entitled to his opinion. We fought for that. I just think he's a jerk.
And now the quarterback sparking new controversy for wearing these socks showing police officers as pigs. Those scandalous socks drawing criticism from law enforcement officials across the country. Police in Vermont tweeting, "Wealthy, privileged person's free speech dehumanizes an entire group of human beings." Sound familiar, Kaepernick? The socks that were worn. Did those not seem negative?
No, that was once again, we have cops that are murdering people. We have cops in the SFPD that are blatantly racist. And those issues need to be addressed.
Players from other teams like Jeremy Lane from Seattle are joining Kaepernick in his seated stand, begging the question, how far will this go?
At this point, I think it will continue to be taking a knee. As far as how long this goes, I'm not sure.
I asked Kaepernick if he plans on taking up the San Francisco Police Association on their invite to visit the academy, and he says yes, adding that he's concerned about racism within the department, saying that some bad cops are giving all cops a bad name.
I'd be interested to get your take on the NFL and the whole thing with their protest during the anthem. Just what are your thoughts on that? Just how that's all become such a national issue.
Yeah, broad question. Well, yeah, it's hard to pinpoint. I mean, obviously, I'm in support of the players who have, knelt and who have not knelt as well, and who, have publicly supported, sort of the movement that Colin Kaepernick started. I think it's really unfortunate and very glaring that he's still out of a job. I think he filed a grievance recently. I think Dell said today that he understands how his fans feel and feel the same, that the players should stand for the anthem. I mean, I don't know who he's talking to, but he's obviously leaving out a huge swath, millions and millions of fans who don't feel that way, and who don't share those same sentiments. So that was a bit of a broad stroke from him. I mean, I don't know. It's like the NFL needs, they kind of just keep playing catch up and keep doing the wrong and saying the wrong sort of thing. So I don't know what it's going to take for them to really step back and be part of the solution instead of tripping over the problem every time. Yeah, I mean, I think obviously we have to stand for the national anthem. That rule was put in place after I knelt. I don't agree with the rule, but I don't think I really have much choice to not follow it. I'll still be me. I'll still speak the way that I feel and speak up about things and try to be part of the solution and be part of the conversation as much as possible, and do, ultimately what I feel is right, and try to, I guess, no matter where I am, hopefully I can be just a person that brings that symbol just by being me. So I can stand, but you still know I knelt at some point.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
So you can see some of the comments that emerged from the Kaepernick kneel, and you'll also learn in your reading that although Rapinoe did kneel in support of Kaepernick, the Professional Soccer League did institute a rule that required that all athletes stand during the playing of the anthem. So as we continue our discussion, we want to look at this concept of framing, and particularly this bottom-up framing in sport. So first of all, framing is a process of using packages to characterize an issue. It's creating a package to communicate and unify information. The question is that, can these packages influence audiences? In the past, this framing was a top-down organization. It utilized the media outlets to frame the perspective. More recently, we have seen more of a bottom-up frame being established. This change involves the everyday individual, as the article describes them, who produce online commentaries. Here we see social media entering the picture and influencing this framing process. In this day and age, we are seeing Facebook and Twitter posts begin the process of changing how incidents like this are discussed and interpreted. Now, we've already looked at the role that nationalism plays in the sporting world in the previous article and discussion. So in this summary, we want to look at how social media influence the narratives of both Kaepernick and Rapinoe. So we want to look at these framing themes, the major themes that emerged as the data was collected. And those themes included American values, racial discussion, shunning, masculinity, representation, athletes' role, and freedom. Let's start our discussion by looking at Kaepernick. In the case of Colin Kaepernick, 4 major themes emerged. They were American values, shunning, racial discussion, and masculinity. First, let's look at American values. As you can read on page 662 of the article, social media users claim that Kaepernick was violating American values. As one example stated, if you are an American citizen, you pledge your allegiance to the American flag and stand for the national anthem. Well, you also have to understand that not all of the comments were negative. Some pointed out that he has a right not to stand for the anthem. Regarding shunning, let's look at shunning. Here we see the comments begin the process of inviting Kaepernick out of the country. I'm using inviting as a nice term or a nice way to describe what they were saying. But can you see any common threads here to what we are currently experiencing in our current political landscape? Regarding racial discussion, Kaepernick was trying to highlight through his activism the issue of racial inequality in America. And masculinity. In this theme, comments centered around what it meant to be a real man. Once again, comments came from both sides of the narrative. Some comments supported Kaepernick's activism, while others condemned it. Now we can also turn our attention to Rapinoe. And the data points here collected about Rapinoe's activism were comprised of 3 major themes: the athlete's role, representation, and freedom. Most of the comments here regarding the athlete's role took the stand that politics and athletics do not mix. Some, however, saw the athletic arena as an appropriate place to communicate a social message. One comment attempted to show that the same message can be welcomed from a different voice. That commenter said, "Funny how when a presidential candidate says America's not great, y'all hoot and holler and cheer. But when an athlete does it, you lose your damn minds." That kind of really paints a pretty interesting picture comparing this example to what we're going to see in the future presidential election and primaries. And then regarding representation, once again, the narratives were found on both sides of the issue, some suggesting that Rapinoe was not worthy to wear the colors of the United States, while others congratulated her stand. And now let's look at the concept of freedom. Now, this was very interesting because the data collected here centered upon the issue of freedom of speech. Now, most of us probably believe that the bulk of the comments would then support Rapinoe as she exercises freedom. However, many express the belief that although we are granted freedom of speech, you are not free from the consequences of that expression. So, in summary, we see that there are certainly limitations from this type of research. But I believe this certainly shows the influence that the social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter can exert on people. We see this every day as we follow the current political landscape in our country. Individuals are learning that this bottom-up framing can influence the population and get the results that are desired. Now, although we use this issue to assist us in our discussion of nationalism, I think that as a future coach, you also need to be aware of the power and implications of social media. As a coach, you will want to make sure that social media is used for positive results and not negative consequences. So as part of this module, you will complete the social media online class for coaches offered by the National Federation of High Schools.